Yeah, I
Can
think
you...
we're live.
Okay, so I guess we're good then. And welcome everyone who's joining or will join in the next few minutes. This is the next episode, or rather special episode of No Name Podcast, where we talk to cybersecurity professionals, international renowned cybersecurity professionals. So these are in English. And our main goal is both to raise awareness about war in Ukraine, but also to donate and get support for the funds that we trust to that support Ukraine and our army. So you'll have the links to do that in the basically any social medias that you'll find posts about this. And today you're a couple of usual hosts. That's me and also Volodymyr Stiran, who you probably know from, if you've listened to No Name Podcast any time before, you probably know us. We also have Alex Starov, who's helping us with organizing the special episode after February 24th. By helping, I mean does pretty much everything. So everyone should be really thankful to Alex for doing this. And as a special guest today, we have Lukasz Olejnik, who's joining us again by invitation from Alex. And Lukasz is a renowned kind of expert on cyber war. He's also part of what was the right name of W3C? I think it's
doing various things.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe Alex, do you want to also kind of introduce more?
First of all, thanks for inviting me here and for this
Absolutely,
initiative.
it's our pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for coming and joining us and supporting Ukraine. So I know Lukasz like for several years. I guess we met at academic conference several years ago, and I know him as graduate from INRIA. It's like a famous university in Europe. I believe it's a Privatics lab, and yeah. So indeed, like Lukasz did lots of like public contributions, projects, papers. He was, consultant and analyst like for many organizations, and definitely it's, like a person to follow on Twitter or to follow his newsletter. If you're interested in cybersecurity, privacy, and cyber.
Let me first correct you. We actually did not met during a conference. It was quite a seminar in this Schloss Dagstuhl, which is the Dagstuhl Castle, which is a pretty niche, perhaps elitist, selective seminar, perhaps conference, where we simply go to some kind of German castle and discuss stuff, which was back then on privacy.
Sounds cool.
Oh
yeah,
exactly. That was a very nice 17th century castle, actual castle of the La Salle family, and it was in Dagstuhl, which was actually it's in Saarland, so the German place, which switched borders between Prussia and Germany and France very often, so it was a quite stormy place. But in general, yes, that was cool. Great wine too.
Awesome. Yeah, I imagine any castle should have some good wine for sure. Because otherwise, why would you go to a castle? Anyway, so I think to many people, privacy can mean different things. So what are the specifics of like your job as a security and privacy consultant and as a scientific advisor to cyber warfare?
Wow. So my capacity of the cyber warfare advisor, this was specifically something which I worked at International Committee of the Red Cross, which is basically a custodian of laws of armed conflict, international humanitarian law. So it was the task was to understand the humanitarian consequences of cyber operations. So what may happen, what may go wrong, whether it's possible to apply those laws to limit possible damage or risk to civilians during armed conflict, and sadly we are actually seeing this now in Ukraine, so this is pretty much relevant. That's that. We published a report. I am quite interested in the topic since then, so I am publishing some articles. Tomorrow there will be one article in Wired, where I discuss something quite relevant to international humanitarian law and also Ukraine case. So perhaps tune in tomorrow. I'm not sure if I should mention some details now, but we will be actually from what I checked from the list of concepts, we'll be discussing this later, so I will stop now. So in general, yes, I am dealing with security and privacy, so I am not really consulting in cyber warfare, which would be well, never mind. I'm doing consulting in security and privacy. So basically, the most important part of this job is to find contracts. When you are independent, then that's the biggest challenge. You are looking for contracts, and then you are simply doing stuff which might be in this case actually for this moment it is. I'm focusing on web privacy, privacy web standards, web browsers, some future architecture of the web. We will go to this more in depth in the next question, I guess. Maybe that's fine.
Sure, yeah. And so this is all done as part of the World Wide Web Consortium activities as well?
Can you repeat, please?
Is this also part of the World Wide Web Consortium
actually, yes,
consulting that you do?
Since it was quite funny because during my PhD, I identified and inspected some bug in some obscure capability of web browsers, which was standardized, and that was researched, and there were suggestions of changes which were adopted by all the browsers. Web specification has been amended, and since then I am quite involved with W3C. So it's since 2000, formally it's since 2015. So I'm basically dealing with security and privacy of web standards, which is close to web security, and looking at some emerging things. I found quite nice holes. I'm probably my favorite was the actual demonstration of leaking data via a light sensor, which was built by and the capability was built into web browsers. So that's quite highly counterintuitive because the users would probably never expect that their data might leak via a light sensor, but yet it probably quite worked. And this is actually mostly fixed, but the story is still ongoing because the standard is being modified and some specific changes in it were introduced, I think, even in the previous week. So that takes time. Also, since 2018, I was elected. In 2018, I was elected in the W3C's technical architecture group, which is the highest level group which assesses web standards on technical basis, where I also focused on privacy. For example, I maintained a document which was aimed to help feature developers, standard developers, to assess the impact of their proposals from privacy point of view.
Got it. That's really that's really impressive that you can actually leak data from a light sensor. I think I've only heard about something like that once from, if I'm not mistaken, from Israeli research group, where they found similar thing from light indicator, like on a Wi-Fi router, that you could actually find data from there as well.
Indeed, that was quite counterintuitive, and it did bypass the, formally at least, the single origin policy, which is the cornerstone of the web security and privacy. That's one web origin should not have access to another origin, but yet it was possible to, for example, exfiltrate data from, for example, something located in an iframe, like data, like perhaps you could imagine that you might load a banking site in an iframe, and then the actual threat model would look as follows. You simply display the contents of this iframe pixel by pixel, and then you simply distinguish the color, white, black. This would be associated with a different readout of the light sensor. And this is quite a kind of an information leak. Also.
Wow, yeah,
It's
definitely the first time
like
I hear
magic.
about something.
Security, it tends to be hard.
It's
exactly.
Hard, this is the first time I hear about such channel in the browser.
Especially when we're talking about intersections of different layers of technology stack, which are in this case completely different, and no one building browsers would think about it, because to put it into their working threat model during the development, many would consider an over exaggeration, right? Light sensors.
Web architecture is complex. Sometimes you add a feature, but it might, together with some other things which are already implemented, it may backfire. So it has to be analyzed all at once.
Yeah, it has to, but we never have enough time for all that analysis. And fortunately for security researchers, it is so. And yeah,
and that's
we have
where all the security failures
boundings.
typically happen, at the intersection of different layers.
Yeah, the sounds really cool.
We definitely should publish links for the report that you mentioned as well. I'm sure that will be very interesting to our audience as well, and to be honest, to ourselves. So we'll be sure to tune in whenever it comes out and read about that too. And as you probably know, in Ukraine we have basically everyone tries to help with whatever means they can, and we have a bunch of IT professionals, someone who organize publicly, some organize kind of a little bit more undercover, so people not really sure what they're doing, but at the same time all of them are focusing on either securing Ukrainian infrastructure and the web, or trying to find something, some way to affect the Russian one. And so given that there are a lot of IT professionals now that work in this realm, trying to defend Ukraine without necessarily in-depth security expertise and knowledge, it's, sometimes it's hard to organize this kind of effort. And like they say, when the war comes, you're never ready for this, right? You just respond with whatever you have. So definitely these efforts are not perfect and not very, very well organized, at least not all of them. So I was wondering if you have any recommendations on how, first, how people can secure their, their own, make sure that they are secure in terms of, do they need to use VPN, or maybe more advanced recommendations, right? How can they ensure their security when they're working on stuff like this? And at the same time, what do you think are the skills that they need to possess or they should work on to take part in these activities, if that makes sense?
Okay, so basically, are we speaking, thanks for this question, which is quite complex and problematic even, but are we focusing mainly on aspects of security, or for example, software engineering and for example, IT in general, just security at this moment?
I think let's focus on security.
So indeed, I am aware that a lot of people are quickly in need to build their security knowledge. They had to. I'm not exactly aware, though, what is the actual extent, whether they simply had to do things fast and make things work, or is it being more organized? So that depends on the actual involvement, but let me discuss something else first. So during Second World War, a long time ago, and a complex story actually, a lot of people from Poland were fighting on the Western Front from the land of UK, United Kingdom. So they were simply aided by the UK so that they could work. It was quite a land warfare, also air warfare. Some very, very successful and effective work and people. Now, after the war, they couldn't simply come back to Poland because of the communist rule, which would perhaps not look so favorably on those involved on the Western Front. So they stayed there. Yet, after the demobilization, they indeed had problems in finding jobs. So some generals, for example, had to resort to being waiters and some cafeterias, which was pretty paradox and sad, but that's how it is. During war, you mobilize a lot of people, and then there is problem with finding job prospects after all is being, let's say, normalized. In IT, and because we are going to IT now, this will of course look completely different because there are better prospects, and this simply looks differently. Now, I'm probably not the best person to advise in such job prospects, job matters, employment matters. But what I can suggest is to structure the curriculum and knowledge in particular ways. For example, look at what are the companies recruiting for. Look at the job post adverts. Try to form those skills in ways that would also satisfy the actual requirements. Perhaps go for some certifications, formal certifications, although this is completely useless for practical points of from the practical point of view, at least at this moment, in the work of in the actual day-to-day work in defending systems. So that's this. What might also be of use is perhaps organizing people who are actually involved in defending systems and quickly acquire security skills. Perhaps it will make sense to organize some kind of movement or interest group, or even loosely organize it, like movement, mailing list, or something like that. Perhaps
or maybe start companies.
Perhaps they take the model of the very old since, like, I'm not sure if you are aware, but like 20, 30 years ago, there were so-called hack groups. run podcasts. I mean, yes, you can share your knowledge, you can write, you can blog posts, something like that. But what I had in mind is to organize and help each other and be visible and structure the skills and knowledge in some particular ways. And also, who knows, after such organization, perhaps there could be some subgroups who could actually even build some kind of startups. Perhaps there would be a possibility of funding from, I don't know, maybe Western companies or during the rebuilding process. So be ready to let's say process or consume funding, which might perhaps become available. Well, that's probably what I could suggest.
Yeah, I was gonna say starting companies sounds a lot like what a lot of folks in Israel are doing. Whoever kind of finished their serving in the army by contract, a lot of them, especially if it has to do with intelligence and working with information technologies, a lot of them start companies afterwards. So it just struck me that we might see the same thing in Ukraine after hopefully soon the war ends. But all the expertise and specialties that people possessed or learned during this time, they'll find a way to utilize it. And I hope it will be much simpler today than it was after the Second World War. And on this note, it's a good point about to talk about cyber war, I think, because it's harder to draw a line what is and what is not a cyber war versus a conventional war. So do you have some kind of definition in mind? When is it just regular hacking, maybe even by state actors, and when it turns into cyber war? Do we have to have, for example, a conventional war going on between countries for the cyber war to also be called this the cyber war? What's your thought on this?
Defining cyber war is actually very easy. It's simply a cyber conflict and cyber attacks, cyber operations during an armed conflict. So in these terms, yes, we can clearly say that yes, Ukraine is involved in cyber war because there is a more general war. So for example, United States or Poland, they are not involved in cyber war, because there is no armed conflict between those countries and some other countries. So basically that should be the thinking. Cyber is one operational, let's say, domain, and many forces consider it as such. For example, NATO, perhaps even Russia. I am sure that Ukraine also understands that, although we will criticize this some of their points soon, and sorry for that, but we will be constructive. Anyway, it makes no sense to consider cyber war as something special or extraordinary and different from a general war, because when you think about that, usually wars and armed conflict are going on in various domains. You have land warfare, sea warfare, air warfare. So cyber is simply one of those domains. So though, what is critical to understand this is that currently in modern times, no war happens in only one domain, which is why it is unlikely that there will be only cyber war, and which is why cyber war is simply going
like
along other operations. Now, in more practical terms, Ukraine experienced a lot of this over the previous decade, and recently also. if only to mention the apparently low impact defacement of government sites in January, but I'm not sure if it was 13 or 14 or something like that.
13, 14, yeah.
Oh yeah, but
14.
the thing is that it was an information operation, right? So cyber enabled information operation. So the target was to actually direct content and perhaps even interest the Western media in that. And some of them actually caught the bite, which was pretty unfortunate. But so this is it. It appears that cyber, which was used very close to the unfortunate start of the land invasion, with, for example, taking down the satellite communication, it seems that it was simply accompanying. It was part of the operations before and also during the start. So it was going on, and with various intensity, things might be scaled with respect to needs, although I don't know if actually operations in this domain were really prioritized. I know that we can actually assume this, that many various countries are active because they, for example, want to learn what is happening. Recently, for example, this American general said that United States cyber army, they were involved in offensive and also defensive operations in context of the conflict, which was actually also throwing the State Department under the bus. So the diplomats immediately went on to explain that no, United States are not part of the conflict, the war. So it was probably not synchronized. So it seems they were surprised. But this is also highlighting the challenges, because now you can consider cyber as actual domains of operations. So you asked whether we could expect more at some point. So this is simply depends on what was being prepared, what is being prepared now, and what is needed, because it seems that the phase of the conflict is strictly confined to air and land now. So cyber would probably not be very useful, although it might be useful in Ukraine, but it should be rather synchronized with the more general uses of information operations. Yeah.
Got it. I think Vlad had something to ask.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe generalize all that. This is very in line with my thinking about the matter. So do you agree that cyber domain actions of a nation state within cyber domain can be either supported or supporting other operations in other domains, right? And in this regard, what's happened in the beginning of the full-scale invasion is a pure example of cyber war, right? So acting in a cyber domain in synchrony with the things going on the ground and in the air is basically, by definition, as you said, right, applying cyber force in order to support the invasion.
That's right. They can simply support. They can go along other operations, but they can also support, and also Ukraine could do this also, if that will be of use.
What I wanted to ask after this clarification is running like intelligence operations, which are not supporting and are not supported by military action in other domains, should not be considered cyber war, right? Even
solely running in intelligence espionage, intelligence operations, when the war is not happening, it should not be regarded as cyber war, because to consider something as part of armed conflict, it has to. Oh yes.
Until it takes effect and becomes an act of war itself.
So there are several ways you can think of this. You can consider high impact cyber operations, cyber attacks, for example, those that could perhaps have physical effects, like physical destruction, paralysis, or maybe even death of people. That's one thing.
Not PETA, for instance, like monetary losses.
That would likely be war.
Yeah.
Or if you have espionage, which has a nexus to an ongoing armed conflict, then you can also consider this cyber war. But if there is no nexus, and we are actually speaking here in terms of, we actually spoke about web standards, but now a lot of people are working on understanding how international law and cyber warfare and cyber operations should work along. So how to understand stuff like that. So it's also a matter of standards to some degree, and perhaps that's how I am understanding this. I am perceiving this in matters of standards. So yes, you can consider some cyber operations as surpassing the threshold of war. But if you already have an armed conflict and you have a cyber operation which has a nexus to this, then you can also consider this as part of cyber war. And then a lot of limitations, and hopefully limitations actually from international humanitarian law should kick in.
I think sometimes it's also hard. Sorry,
it all contributes to the rules and traditions of war, right? So people who are engaging in cyber war could become valid military targets, combatants, and so on. Which is it can escalate really quickly. So we need to have lawyers engaged in order to put this in order. But I understand where you're going. A lot of thinking should be applied, and many agreements should be made in order to standardize these activities at the moment and in the future.
How to standardize is a good question. You can there are two ways of that. I mean, it's very complicated in general. This happens over decades, even centuries. It's based on the practice of states, but it can be speed up if states express what they think or consider, how they would be handling those things, or how they would perceive some actions. So this might be called, for example, a cyber norm, or something called a cyber norm. You can also consider making a specific treaty, but this probably won't happen. So what is important is the emerging customs. So what the states actually are doing. And perhaps some kind of negotiations in relation to cyber norms, but this is complicated because there are ongoing negotiations happening within the United Nations. For example, there were some norms developed, like you should not attack assert, which is the crisis
emergency response.
Emergency response group. But the problem is those cyber norms, they are being created for peacetime. Although recently, in the previous year, every country involved in those negotiation groups, including Russia even, they accepted that international humanitarian law applies to cyber domain. But it is unclear if those cyber norms developed as part of the work of those negotiating groups, whether they actually apply during an actual war. So most people would say, or at least hope so. Then again, most people have little clue about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I'm so sorry I took
indeed-
so much time, but I'm really interested in how this conflict goes. Yeah, and I appreciate your perspective on this.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
indeed a
I
complicated
really
question, I think.
I really spent some time in the recent years to understand this, although it doesn't really pay off. Like you cannot get a job at a big corporation with this. So it's basically more of a either hobby or something like a work in policy aspects.
Yeah.
Like for example, even if when I was involved in International Committee of the Red Cross. That said, there are more and more advisors, and many policymakers should have advisors who understand that, which is a problem because many policymakers in the West, even preceding the current war in Ukraine, they really struggled to understand that. So
Yeah,
it seems their advisors were not of the best qualities. Let's proceed to the next one.
Sure. Let's move on. But it was a very interesting topic to discuss as well. So what we have next is a question about the strategy, I would say, of cyber wars, right? So at the CyberSec Forum, Deputy Head of Ukrainian State Service of Special Communications stated that the development of the concept of cyber deterrence should be based on the experience of the nuclear deterrence program. So what are your thoughts about it? Should we implement a deterrence system, and how would it work with cyber warfare? Because with nuclear, it's a little bit interesting in the sense that on one side, each country's nuclear program, well, very top secret and everything. At the same time, they wanted to show capabilities, right? For when you have mutual annihilation strategy, right? You need to show capabilities that this is what happens if you hit us first. And in cybersecurity, I guess it's kind of similar way, but how do you show the capabilities? You cannot have the nuclear tests, the bomb testing that you can demonstrate and show how it happens. So like, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, did he really say that it should be modeled on nuclear deterrence?
Alex?
Did really say yes? So wow, I am wondering, and I will be delighted if someone from the Ukrainian government will be listening to us, because that's quite not the best choice of a model. It seems that either those are, I'm not sure who was that. Who was that? What was the name of the guy?
I think it's Alexei Poti, right? Yeah, so it's kind of a citation, indeed.
It was, as far as I know, that was a talk in Katowice.
Yeah, but who was that? What's the name of the guy?
It's Alexander Poti. He is the deputy head of Ukrainian State Service of Special Communications and Information Protection.
Because the thing is, yes, a lot of time was allocated to discuss and develop.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it Alexei or Alexander?
Alexander. Sorry.
Alexander Poti?
Yes. You must know the guy.
So yeah, I was gonna say, Lukasz, if you have something to say, we can definitely translate it, because he was my teacher in the university.
Yeah, and I'm listening very carefully, because I will make sure he views this recording afterwards.
I didn't realize until now that he is the author of this.
So let me first highlight that, yes, this highlights the importance of advisors of key policymakers, because we cannot I assume that the high-level policymaker must be an expert himself, of course. I mean, especially now they are very busy, and it's the thing is that a lot of people were discussing cyber deterrence, using deterrence in context of cyber over the years. There were some attempts to apply that. There were a lot of theorizing. One arm was to, for example, issue harshly formatted diplomatic message, or, for example, issue some enact sanctions for cyber attacks, or even consider retaliating. And indeed, many of that was modeled on nuclear deterrence. Now, why? The reason is that a lot of time in international relations and security studies were devoted to nuclear doctrine, and actual deterrence theory came to be at this particular times in 60s, 70s. So it was quite poisoned with thinking in context of nuclear warfare. Cyber is completely different to nuclear. Applying the same principles is misguided. This is completely different, and the approach should be quite different. We are more and more seeing that cyber deterrence is actually not really working unless it must be tuned in some different ways, which is a future story. But I would be very wary, or I would warn from this, and I would also I have to stress that it highlights the difficulties of policymakers having advisors who are not really up to the tasks, or they are perhaps not they are not familiar with the domain, or are incapable of forming actual advice for the policymaker to make, because I assume that this actual policymaker was communicating something which was prepared by his advisors and some policy analysts, something like that. So I understand that you are all during war and you are very busy, and perhaps those people have much more important things to do than to consider the previous few years in the domain, which is also quite niche and complex to understand. But I would suggest to change the advisors to others. And sorry for being impertinent.
No, I think
no
makes
problem
sense.
with that. We are all learning here. So just to summarize that, would you advise against drawing analogies from other domains in building cyber capability?
I would consider this domain as something unique. You can consider others, but it should not be based on actual nuclear deterrence, which is something very, very specific. And I would be cautious against anyone who uses cyber and nuclear in the same line, actually.
Okay.
It would be a strong suggestion to reconsider the employment of such a person, unless it's in justified ways. So sorry for formulating this in this way. Yeah.
It's everyone has a view on it, right? And this one is yours. So I think that makes perfect sense. And
actually, Ruslan, one follow-up, right? So what is the main difference of this, like main uniqueness of this cyber domain? Is it like the challenge of attribution, or like any other, challenges that make it specific, right? That we can use any analogies.
May I try? So
yeah, go ahead.
The main difference, I think, that cyber capability is much more accessible than nuclear, because you basically don't have to be a nation state in order to project cyber power, right? There are many non-state groups that are quite influential. Let's hear the tragic story of Costa Rica versus Conti, right? That is going on for a couple of weeks now.
That also depends, because some capabilities may still be unique to states, because they, for example, it will be difficult to imagine hacker group formed by even the very advanced students. It will be difficult to imagine such a amateur group to pull off a Stuxnet. Some capabilities are indeed very dangerous, powerful, strong, and limited to states.
It took a while, though, for the details of Stuxnet.
It all depends. And by the way, I'm currently compiling a book, even, which is supposed to have some kind of linkage and blurs between technology and policy, and also even diplomacy and law even. So yes, I'm speaking of deterrence there. I'm also speaking of escalation, because yes, I won't deny that cyber can absolutely be used in escalation. It was used in escalation prior to the start of the current war in Ukraine. But linking it to nuclear deterrence, no.
I think it also stems from the fact that a lot of those folks, who are advising Ukrainian officials, they come from older generation that kind of, before information security, they were mostly in the military, like during Soviet times, and I think they're used to drawing these analogies, which not necessarily make sense in the modern world.
Yeah, let me stress also, because now the whole world is paying attention to what is going on in Ukraine, and also what are the Ukraine policymakers saying. So really get a grip, and because really the whole world is paying attention and listening. So it would be great to actually offer some added value and even limit the risk of being criticized by actual people who were involved in this domain. This is probably something that Ukraine could consider more generally. It is absolutely critical. I mean, the whole world is receptive to the communication and information streamed from Ukraine, issued from Ukraine, but it would help if all that is well informed. So work on that.
Thank you.
We'll do. We'll do.
Very valuable piece of advice and the constructive criticism.
We'll do our best, yes, and I think no need to apologize for kind of for being pertinent here, because that, I think, translates the message much more clearly instead of like some more soft words, if that makes sense, especially when you think it is important. So with this, I think we can move to the last section on personal safety, just to make sure that we have a little bit of time for that. So the first question would be, you wrote the other day on Twitter that modern tech truly introduce some issues with human life when human life may be at stake. And during these no-name podcast episodes, we typically try to collect some suggestions about OPSEC and personal safety and security practices for people involved in war, whether it's actual combatants or just volunteers, that may be close to war zone, or even people who are located on the occupied territories. So what would you suggest to Ukrainians to protect their smartphones, any communications, and any recommendations in general?
Okay, so we will not be speaking about cybersecurity now, but actually how to maintain safety which is quite a complex issue too, but let me be clear that it's blatant violation of the rules and international law to aim and target at civilians. So let me be clear that this is a blatant violation. It is unacceptable. Yet, according to reports from Ukraine, it sadly did happen.
Unfortunately, that's the thing with war, that you can't really enforce laws on war. I guess the only thing you can do is try to bring justice after the war if you win. So it's indeed complex, but unfortunately, I think all the crimes that can happen do happen during the war, unfortunately. So the best that we can do to try, assuming that all the crime wars may happen or do happen, what would be our recommendation to people to try and minimize the impact on them?
Well, it probably also depends whether they care about it, whether it is being respected or not. Probably depends on the places and groups. But it's very difficult to, from my point of view at least, to get access to the scale, whether it's being violated and not respected every single time, or it's just in several places. But in general, yes, what I must stress is that civilians must not be attacked, yet actual people need to be worried that they should limit their personal risk too. So they should not count on the respecting of those laws. They should limit the risk in the ways that are available. And how to limit the risk? We are sadly aware of aiming at civilians using phones, for example. I think there were also searches for smartphones.
I can confirm that's exactly what happened
some
to
inspections of content
my friend's mom. Yeah.
So perhaps let's focus on this, because the user civilians are able to control this. As I say, the civilians must not be attacked, but civilians must err on the side of caution. So it's best not to keep any content related to war activity on their devices. They should be maintained in usable state. Like, it should be clear that they are using those smartphones, but they should have no content such as videos or photos or even texts linked to armored material movement, or, for example, videos of or photos of let's say, tanks. This is to reduce the risk that upon inspection something would become potentially incriminating from the point of view of the aggressor, because the civilian must assume that things on their devices may be used against them. And also cynically, for example, it is probably best to assume that the contents of smartphones should be pruned from such stuff, just maintained in that incredible way. So it's clear that it's not recently, for example, reset. That it should look like something that you are actually using, but it should not look like something that you are making photos of military material, because and I do not wish to be the devil's advocate here, and I am not, but international humanitarian law says that there is a clear distinction between combatants and civilians. Civilians must not be attacked, and combatants can legally engage in fighting. For example, Ukrainian soldiers, they can legitimately defend or attack even the aggressors. But civilians should not engage in such activity, because then they voluntarily forfeit their protected status. And this might become important, for example, because in some cases, modern technologies are blurring the lines. Because, for example, Ukraine extended their e-government application in functionality of report an enemy, right? If I understand correctly, it's possible to report sightings of tanks or something like that. Am I right? Yes. So it's clear that, and it's obvious and understandable, sure, that Ukrainians cannot be expected to do anything less than everything to defend, sure, but we should consider what may be the implications, because formally speaking, when you make such a photo of a military material like tanks, for example, and you are sending it somewhere for the army to act with coordinates, considering how international humanitarian law works, such a person doing this would forfeit their civilian status, because formally they might be seen as part of the ISR system, which is niche term
intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Because then the point behind enemy functionality is to provide information to the army so they may engage the target, right? But that makes the civilian a part of this ISR system. So logically reasoning, in this case, the civilian becomes a part of the military system, and there is a way to interpret the standards which were developed over the previous decades and ages even. It is possible to consider such a civilian as someone who forfeited their civilian status. And this is not a good idea for the civilian to do, because if a civilian forfeits their protected status, they may be engaged militarily. The problem is that I am not sure if people using enemy feature are aware of that. I am not sure if Ukrainian government is actually explaining this, and I understand that a lot of civilians are simply engaging in defense, and that's fine, but they should be aware of the consequences. And this would be also the centerpiece of my tomorrow's Wired article, and I will simply invite you to read it and perhaps share it with someone. In my view, it is written very thoroughly. It analyzes this very tough and difficult topic. It might be useful for you. I am also aware that there will be some legal analysis of this issue. So we will probably learn more over the next weeks or months, but my article will probably be the first such attempt to analyze the topic. It's written in Wired, so I directed to a general reader, so that's why it might be of help. Once again, it's clearly understandable that Ukraine is waging a just war of self-defense, but the individual civilians should still err on the side of caution, and they should be aware of the risks.
I think the bigger problem here, arguably at least, is that Russia and Russian forces might not go into, I'm pretty sure they won't go into such deep analysis of the status of civilians on the occupied territories. So that's another thing. But along the lines, what I would like to add in terms of measures or countermeasures, rather, or precautions for the people on the occupied territories. And this is one that I'm really, really proud of my friend here, who actually the one who kind of got me thinking about this. If you clean your device of any kind of videos or photos or chats or materials that might indicate that you are involved in somehow in the military action, another thing to keep in mind is your social media and your friend circle, because even if you did all of that and you clean your own device, but all your friends on Facebook kind of are in military form and say all the words of support to Ukraine, that may also trigger the combatants or whoever is there on the occupying the territory, whether it's like official Russian like military forces or just Russians that came after the military was there. And the reason for that is because basically I tried to kind of meet with a friend here who I asked, hey, like, I know you're married, so like, where's your husband? Like, tag him somewhere, like, so I at least know the contact. And she mentioned like, yeah, sorry, I don't tag him anywhere because his parents are on the occupied territory, so we don't want to, we don't want any kind of connection pop up. And that made me thinking that this actually might be a good idea to not only keep it pay attention to what you do, but also what all your contacts do, or like at least the ones that kind of easily pop up on your device. And I think with that, do we have time? Because I know we're at 9 o'clock here, but or depending which time zone you're in, if we have a last question.
Make it brief. So paranoia is not advised because it's difficult to maintain a state of paranoia constantly. Difficult. It's a mental toll. It's not advised. As I said, civilians, users, people should err on the side of caution, which means basically to limit their risks. But also, let's be fair that some services like WhatsApp, like Telegram, like whatever, they are very useful to disseminate information. So in this case, my take is that use whatever works, because it's important to have information during such a crisis. So I wouldn't be against any information channel, especially when it's already widely used. And if I understand correctly, a lot of people in Ukraine are using Telegram, for example, and also probably very useful because it allows very large groups. So it's indispensable for dissemination of information. So I wouldn't advise paranoia. Basic personal safety.
It's as always, it's a balance, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Whatever
I think
works.
I think we're time here. So do you think we can wrap it up, Alex?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think with that, Lukasz, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I could add. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I hope something of that will be useful to you. So basically, at the very end, I would just add that maybe simply win this war. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
We're doing our best. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for your time and supporting Ukraine.
Please send us the Wired article, and I guess like we'll read it, right? And yeah, I wonder whether it's possible to translate in Ukrainian actually.
Just read it. Just read it. We all follow you already.
Yeah.